Okay, we'll get going. So again, welcome everyone. My name is John Grubb. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Bay Area Council. Honored to have that position. Today is a really exciting day. I'm really excited to share this data with you, but excitement might be the wrong word because the data is not great. The Bay Area Council does this poll. We've been doing it, the Bay Area Council poll, since I think 1980. To check in with residents. So every year we do a poll with you, our members, to understand what business leaders are thinking. And then we also do a check-in with voters and residents about what's going on with them. And so these are those results. They are very interesting, and you're going to get to hear a little bit more about them. I will sort of break the headline. It's really bad. The way residents feel about the region right now is probably one of the worst that we've seen. And so part of the questions that we need to think about, you need to think about as you're hearing these results, are of course questions that you can ask of Ruth, who I'll introduce in a second, about the poll, but also what can we be doing differently? The Bay Area Council, we cannot honestly look at these results and feel good about the work that we're doing. We need to do an awful lot more, and we need to do an awful lot better. And we're going to need your help to be able to do that. And so we can talk about all of that when we finish with the poll results. But now I'm going to introduce Ruth Bernstein. It is a distinct privilege and honor to introduce Ruth Bernstein. So she is, in a way, a Yoda of the Bay Area. She has been plumbing the depths of the Bay Area residents' psyche, and what do they think about all sorts of different issues for, I think it's 30 years, some amount of time like that. She does not look it, but we'll just trust that's what the bio says, that she's been doing that. And so not just the Bay Area Council poll, but for all sorts of different organizations all over the region. And so please think of questions that you can ask her about this poll, but she's also really good at just answering other questions too. So whatever you've got, throw it at her, or you can throw it at me. I'll be helping out too to moderate the Q&A. But with that, the knower of all of the Bay Area, let me introduce to you Ruth Bernstein, and let's get going on the Bay Area Council poll.
Thank you, John. And hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Bernstein, CEO of EMC Research. We are actually a national polling firm. I do most of the work we do here. I work on is California work all over, but a ton of stuff, as John mentioned, in the Bay Area. So in addition to sharing these poll numbers with you, we're doing all kinds of polling on lots of different issues and can kind of put this into context. So I'll just jump right in here and talk through the numbers. And as John mentioned, you can definitely put questions into the Q&A, and we'll have some time afterwards as well to answer some of your questions. I'll try not to go too fast, but I usually do talk pretty fast. Overall mood, and this, just to note, sorry, this is a survey of 1,000 voters in the 9-county Bay Area. It was just conducted in March, so this is fairly fresh data, just within the last month. And you'll see a lot of trend data because we've been asking these questions over quite a period of time. So on that, so overall mood, as John mentioned, we're feeling pretty cranky overall. So we created what we're calling the Bay Area Mood Index. So taking some questions that we asked in this poll that we've been asking for the last few years, we recode those and do some math, and we put those on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is people feeling really, really negative, 10 is feeling really positive, and our overall mood index right now is on the negative side. It's not way, way over, but it's definitely on the negative side at an average of 4.5. And the questions that we use to create that, and we'll show you a little more on the trend on these questions. So we ask a question about overall, are things going in the right direction or off on the wrong track? We see 64% say things in the Bay Area are off on the wrong track. 48% say they're likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. And then this question we kind of created a few years ago, even with its challenges, the Bay Area is still the best place on earth to live. We're divided. 49% agree with that, 48% disagree. And then economic indicators, because of course those are really important as we think about mood. How is the Bay Area economy doing today compared to 6 months ago? A third think it's better, but 40% think it's worse. And then how do you think the Bay Area economy is going to be doing 6 months from now? Only 29% saying they think it's going to be better. So that overall outlook. When we look at that mood index, as I said, today we're at 4.5 on that scale. We were a little happier a year ago, about almost exactly 1 year ago, when the vaccines were rolling out and people were starting to feel like maybe we were going to maybe come out of that pandemic with the vaccines. Our mood index was 5.1 at that time. Early in the pandemic, in 2020, we did this poll almost right after the shelter-in-place orders went in. Our mood was not good then, no surprise, at only 4.2, but a year before that, we were feeling a little bit more positive. So we'll be able to continue to track this over time, every year as we look at how things shift. So also a big indicator, as I mentioned, that question we like to ask, are things going in the right direction or are they off on the wrong track? And everyone thinks this is weird wording, but we do find it's useful to evaluate overall mood. So looking here, we've got 64% right now that think that the Bay Area is off on the wrong track. And you can see how high that is compared to historic numbers. We're kind of at an overall pessimistic high on the pessimism. Only 21% think things are going in the right direction. And that's the lowest we've seen it in, 8 years, more than 8 years. And then economic ratings. So I mentioned what the mood is today. You can see how that's been shifting over time. So right now, only 33% saying the Bay Area economy is doing better than it was 6 months ago. Back in the kind of boom years, 2015, 2016, 2014, much higher percentage thinking that the economy was good. We see how that was declining as we headed into 2019, 2020. And then optimism about the future, that's been jumping around a lot. Right now, only 29% say things are going to get better. We were much more optimistic a year ago and very, very pessimistic 2 years ago. So that really mood has been changing, and the pandemic is causing much more mood shift than we've ever seen before. A lot of volatility. Then this question, best place to live on Earth. 49% saying the Bay Area is the best place to live on Earth, and you can see that has been trending down over the last few years. So not a massive shift, but definitely kind of starting to drop off, which is, not what we want to see when we all think about the Bay Area as a great place to live.
Hey, Ruth.
It's declining. Yeah, John.
Can I just weigh in for a sec? So absolutely. I just want to make sure, can everybody see the slides? I got a text from someone that they are not. If you could use the chat feature really quickly and let us know if you can see the slides. Okay. Okay, good. All right. Sorry, that one person must have an issue. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
Okay. I was thinking, after 2 years of doing this, I hope I got it right. Screen sharing. All right. This other question we look at to consider overall mood. I'm likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. We've always seen a lot of movement. We're an urban environment. People move, young people move here, they move out. But right now we've got 48% saying that they're likely to move out in the Bay in the next few years. And what we're seeing is a very high on the strongly agree. So 26% strongly agree that they're going to move. And that, really that's the highest intensity we've seen in the last few years. So, and again, that looks like it's trending up again and not down. And then all these crazy lines. This question is, what is the most important problem facing the Bay Area today? And respondents could fill in whatever issue, and then we code those all together. What we're seeing right now is that homelessness is coming up as the top first response. So 24% are mentioning homelessness or did mention homelessness as the most important problem facing the Bay Area. That was their first response. And you can see how much that orange line has been shifting and going up over time. We've always, for a long time, we've seen homelessness mentioned as a most important problem in San Francisco. we have seen that really grow throughout the Bay Area, unfortunately. So in San Jose 10 years ago, we never saw people mentioning homelessness as a top of mind concern. Now it's very, very high. The same throughout Santa Rosa and Contra Costa County, everywhere we're seeing that very, very high. And then the next top concern, housing, now 21% saying that's the most important problem, and that has dipped a lot. Crime is now up with 15% saying that crime is the most important problem, and that was much lower a few years ago. Also, cost of living, also an increased concern with 10% mentioning that, and COVID, very few percent mentioning that as the most important problem. These next couple of questions, and I'm going to start moving through some of this is a little bit faster because there's a lot here. So overall, Bay Area is a center of innovation, has great job opportunities, has great opportunities for education, is a great place to do business. Those are all still high. A majority and a huge percentage agree with many of these questions, but they're all down a little compared to 2 years ago. So, not feeling as much like this is such a great place. Those numbers are down. Is a great place to live. 2/3 still agree with that statement, but it's down compared to two years ago. Is a safe place to live. That's gone from 63 to 47. And then good housing options. Very few people think we have good housing options here in the Bay Area, and good transportation system, less than half. I think that's true. So moving into housing, overall housing, as we saw, very few think that the Bay Area has good housing options. Only 86% disagree that we have good housing options. 67%, 2/3 are saying it's harder to find housing now compared to a year ago, and just over half support building more housing in their neighborhood. This question about is it easier or harder to find housing, it's been pretty consistent with 2/3 or more saying it's harder to find housing, except for a weird blip last year, but now it's back up again. And then on building housing, I support policies that make it easier to build new housing in transit and commercial areas. 72% agree with that. So that it was up a little bit in 2019, 2020. It's down a little, but not a lot. But again, that's still a high percentage that agree with that. But then when we ask about supporting housing in my neighborhood, so again, 72% support building new housing in transit and commercial areas. In my neighborhood, the support is much lower. Only 57% support building housing in their neighborhood, and that is down compared to a few years ago. Looking at what people are spending on housing. So this is not, we didn't ask them to go show us their rent statement or their mortgage statement, but asking people about what percentage of your housing of your income do you spend on housing. We are seeing a higher percentage reported. So do you spend a quarter or less of your income on salary? Right now, only 29% of Bay Area respondents here said they're spending a quarter or less. That's down from what we've seen previously. Now 38% are saying they spend a quarter to a half of their income on salary. And then 18% say they are spending more than half of their income on housing. And that has been going up over time consistently. So pretty high percentage. And just to note that there's a big difference between homeowners and renters. Renters much more likely to be spending a large percentage of their income on housing. On policies, we asked just a series of do you support or oppose on a number of policies related to housing, and a lot of support. So adding ADUs, 88% support that, converting unused office space and making it into housing, 83% support, making it easier for cities to approve housing developments of up to 10 units, 79%. Now remember, only 57% support building more housing in their neighborhood, but conceptually, voters are saying that they support making it easier to build housing, making it easier to build duplex, triplex, or fourplexes in single family home zoned areas. As you can see, now that starts to decrease. We still have a majority, 61% supporting, but now as we start to talk about higher density in single family areas, we see the support go down. And then on policies around not building more housing. So reducing state funding for cities that fail to provide enough housing, only 57% support that, 43% oppose. Allowing state law to override local laws regarding where and when how much housing can be built. A majority oppose allowing state law to override. And then allowing state laws to override local land use and development laws that restrict new housing, 55% oppose. So we know that housing is a problem. We don't think that there is access to good housing in the Bay Area. People are spending a large percentage of their income on housing, but many of these policies that would encourage new housing to be built are resisted by many voters. So a real contradiction there. As we get into the top issue facing the Bay Area, homelessness, 86% say homelessness has gotten worse. 31%, as we mentioned, say it's the most important problem facing the Bay Area. And over half think their government, their local government, should be spending more to address the issue. We see very high support for some policies, such as here, conservatorship. So 87% support giving local governments more authority to help place homeless individuals who suffer severe mental health or substance abuse disorders into conservatorships so that they can get treatment. 56% strongly support that policy. We also see when we ask a forced choice question, which do you agree with? We need to get tough on those who are unsheltered, who refuse treatment. No one should be allowed to stay on the streets if shelter is available. 70% agree with that, compared with the unsheltered have a right to live how they choose. No one should be forced to live in a shelter, even if space is available. Only 28% agree with that. Moving into transportation, I know we covered a little bit on a lot of different topics here. So 51% disagree that the area has a good transportation system. 30% say it's harder to get around. Only 30% right now. It's a little easier to get around. And then most people still driving alone as their form of their primary mode of transportation. So, when we've been asking this, is it easier or harder to get around compared to a year ago? It was pretty high, with the plurality saying it's harder to get around. Now that's dropped, with most people saying it's kind of the same. I fully expect that as more and more people start commuting to work, coming into work, we're going to see that orange line go back up again as traffic starts to get worse. We also see a long-term commitment here to public transportation. So we asked, again, this forced choice setup here. The pandemic has changed the way we use public transit in the Bay Area forever. We need to adapt to public transit for the reality that fewer people are using it, versus it was a temporary reduction. And sooner or later, we're going to need public transit just as much as ever, and 73% agree with it was only a temporary disruption. We need public transit more than ever, or we will. But most people are driving. So 82% now say that driving alone is something that they're doing for transportation at least 2 or 3 times a week. And that is up compared to how it was pre-pandemic, a little bit. So more people driving. We are seeing, of course, we saw during the pandemic a real drop in carpool use, bike, ride share, all of the modes of transportation. People weren't getting out. We are starting to see those numbers come back up here. So now we've got 16% say that they're carpooling at least a few times a week, walking, 9% biking. That's almost up to where it was pre-pandemic. Ride share is still lower than it was pre-pandemic, but that's coming back up as well. And then public transportation, so bus, BART, as you can see, it's starting to come back up, but it is still not at the pre-pandemic levels of use. All right, another topic, crime and public safety. As we saw increasing concern here about these issues, with 52% now, 52% disagree that Bay Area is a safe place to live. 65% said that they avoided going to a big city downtown area because of crime. and 91% are concerned about home break-ins. Looking at, is the Bay Area a safe place to live? Was the overall 47% agreed with that. We did see some difference by county, so we wanted to mention that with San Mateo, Marin, Santa Clara, higher on the percentage thinking it's a safe place to live, and lower in some areas like Alameda, Solano, Napa, below the average. And then I avoid going to big city downtown areas in the Bay Area because of crime. As we said, 2/3 agree with that statement, a third disagree, and very high concern about some of these crime issues. So car and home break-ins, 91% concerned, 70% very concerned. Violent crime, also very high, 63% very concerned. Public drug use, panhandling and other public nuisances, almost half very concerned, 79% concerned. So moving into the business climate, overall, most think we're a center of innovation, has good job opportunities. It's a good place to do business. We've talked a little about the economic indicators already. And so just looking at some of these questions, is a center for innovation, 79% agree with that, has good job opportunities, is a good place to do business, agree with that, but a lot of concerns. So when we ask about thinking about the future of the Bay Area economy, how concerned are you about each of these? Housing costs, number one, 80% very concerned about housing costs. Inflation, 66% very concerned about inflation. The amount of taxes businesses pay, 41% very concerned, 73% somewhat concerned. Regulations, the impact of the pandemic, companies moving out of the Bay Area and companies growing jobs outside of the Bay Area. We also see very high concern level about those issues. And then finally on COVID, a couple of questions we did ask about COVID. We're seeing that a lot of folks feel like they're ready to get back to normal. Less concern, lower concern about actually contracting COVID, but quite a bit of concern about the impact on mental health, especially for youth. So somewhat related to COVID, also related to transportation, we asked people about how often are you working from home. So among those who are employed, we saw 67% are working from home at least sometimes. Only a third are never working from home. And we have a quarter that said that they're always working from home. And people feel like they're pretty productive. So only 24% of those that work from home think they're less productive when they're working from home. And then many people don't think they're going back to a workplace or for a while. So 32% saying that they're going to work from home permanently. We do have 29% that say that they're already going back to work. Some people think they're going to go back in a few months, but quite a few think that it's going to be longer. So definitely we'll see what happens. We know some of the attitudes on this are changing over time as we see what happens with COVID, but many people think they're not going to go back to work. And then returning to normal. So a year ago, we asked people, when do you think you'll feel safe returning to normal? And very few people, only 11% said now. We now have 30% say that they feel like they're going to be ready to return to normal, or they are ready to return to normal now. And then another 15% saying within 6 months. But quite a few people, 12% saying never, and that it could be more than 2 years. So a real difference in attitudes on this situation. And I think that is the end. So I can, I whipped through that, but I can definitely answer questions, and I'll take a look if there are questions in the chat or the Q&A.
So Ruth, thank you very, very much. Job well done. Again, these were hard results to see, and I think we'll probably have to switch back and forth and bring the slides back up, just so we know that. So one quick question that you can answer quickly from, I forget who it was, sorry, but was about, from Molly, was just about the demographics of the respondents. Were they representative of the Bay Area population? You know, what generally, and how did you reach out to people, if you could restate that?
Yes, they are representative of, we used registered voters. So we took a list of registered voters and we look at the demographics. So they are representative of registered voters throughout the 9-county Bay Area.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I'll respond to a couple of comments or questions that came in just about what the Bay Area Council has done or is doing about housing, with the caveat that it is not enough. But there are some major, if you consider the housing policy in the Bay Area and California to be an aircraft carrier, we believe we are starting to turn the ship. So we passed a set of laws that changed the RENA process, which is an acronym for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And so every city in the Bay Area and California, and county, if it's an unincorporated land, has to zone for a certain amount of housing. This has been a process that's happened for a long time, but it was not respected by those that were doing the zoning. And so we changed that. And so now if they don't actually plan for the appropriate amount of housing that they're supposed to, as assigned by the state for population growth, they lose some funding that would come in transportation. And then more importantly, if they don't do it, they lose some discretionary review. And so cities, I can show you newspaper articles across the region, are getting religion in that they have to actually zone for housing. And they fight against it. And then the planning director tells them, if you fight against this, we're going to lose our ability to really significantly shape the housing that's coming to our city or to our county. And so they are actually starting to plan for an awful lot more. And so you're going to see this over the next few years, a real change that way. Second thing that we've done that's been really important is on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So as you saw Ruth present, those are pretty popular. We saw that a couple of years ago, so we passed some laws to make it much easier to build ADUs in communities across California. And it's been really successful. Actually in LA, 20% of the new housing units, such as they are, but still it's good, were ADUs that were coming through. And so that's really spiked up, that we're working on that. And then for this year, I'll stop soon. We're working on cleaning up ADU legislation to make it even easier to build those, because people welcome these kind of housing units in neighborhoods. It doesn't change the neighborhood character very much. But the other one is CEQA reform. And so right now, you're able to file a lawsuit against any project without real financial hardship, if you're or paying for the lawsuit that you would wage against a project. And so even if you lose on the CEQA challenge, the owner of the project still has to pay your legal costs. It's just a crazy part of the law. And so that's something we're trying to change that could tamp down CEQA lawsuits. And then of course, losing the discretionary review is another way of helping to dissipate the CEQA impact on housing that's going on. So just to answer that really quickly. So Ruth, one of the questions was about from Liz Ames, who is a BART director from the Fremont Hayward area, about converting warehouse space to housing, or did we delve into it this way, or have you asked any similar questions in other polls about that?
About converting, I mean, we did ask a question in here about converting office space into housing. And there was quite a bit of support for that. So converting unused office and commercial space into housing, 83% support, 51% strongly support. But of course, that was conceptually, not talking about any individual project.
Specific spots, yeah. We've also seen a fair amount of effort to transform failing malls. Once, in the 80s and 90s, booming malls, but now are becoming, I think the term is gray space, or there's some other expression for it, I don't have it. But those are also great opportunities for housing, because there is so much infrastructure, parking, and activity that it doesn't really disturb the neighborhood to bring a lot of housing there. So Merity Hill from Corn Ferry asked about homeless. Well, lots of different pieces in here. So the one thing I'll mention that the Bay Area Council is doing on homelessness right now is passing some legislation to make it easier to build homeless shelters. If you think it's hard to get housing built, it's much harder to get even a homeless shelter built. We, by law, cannot get people off the streets wherever they are in your neighborhood, in the downtowns, until you actually have a place to have them go. And so we have to get a lot more homeless shelters built, of whatever they are, basic shelters or supportive housing. And so we're working on a law that would make it much easier to actually get those built. An anonymous attendee, so any sense of where respondents place blame for the current state of affairs, state government, local government, or business. So Ruth, any insights on that? Who's at fault?
Everybody. I don't know. We didn't ask it specifically. I think, some of the overall mood is not specific to any one thing. We have been in a pandemic for 2 years. There is a war going on in Europe. Gas prices are $6 a gallon. There is a reason that people are angry and in a bad mood. So it's not any one thing. And there are people sleeping on the streets, which is sad and makes people frustrated. And so I think there's a lot of things. And so who they blame, it's hard to say exactly.
I guess, can I ask Ruth as a follow-up on that, how bad should we feel? So you mentioned that you're a national polling firm, and you're certainly, and you do a lot of polling throughout California. Is everyone in this situation, or no? Austin, Texas, and Florida, they're doing great, like in everything that we read, and we do need to feel bad.
It's definitely different. But we are seeing a lot of dissatisfaction all over the country, and especially in urban areas, I think. But yeah, it's not unique. It's not unique to us right now.
Okay. Thank you. Rami writes, how will it affect the Bay Area economy if a third of voters work from home permanently as they expect? Well, it will have sweeping changes. So on another project we're working with Ruth is about the return to transit, where we've been asking companies about that. And so what we're seeing so far is that it kind of goes like this. There's the amount of travelers that go to work. They'll fill up the cars first, and then when the excess capacity generally spills into public transit. And so a lot of what we've seen is a big reduction in the public transit ridership, but not in the driving, which is not a great environmental solution or just societal choice. And so there's that. There's also the impact of downtowns. In downtown San Francisco, I know Mayor Breed, I'm sure the same with Liccardo and Schaff and Oakland and San Jose, are looking at how do we redo zoning and what's going to happen in our downtowns if all that commercial space isn't used for commercial activities and change it to housing. So there are a lot of conversations going on around it, but no question, sweeping changes. So another question here, is there a correlation between people who do not want to return to the office and those who do not expect things to return to normal? Could people responding, basically, is there a crosstab that we've done where you're looking at those not returning to work and sort of how they feel about things and their views?
I didn't look into that specifically on those who don't want to return to the office. Typically, we've been seeing, there is a different attitude among those who are worried about COVID and those who are not. So there may be just a different philosophy among people who are coming back to the office because they're just not as worried about COVID overall. And they may be just kind of different than people who are still staying home or that have been staying home in the last 6 months.
Okay, two BART related questions coming up. So one was, again, from Liz Ames, BART director in the East Bay, was about employers giving transit passes. So many of our members, who are the best companies in the Bay Area, thank you very much, do offer transit passes already. And we're having further conversations with them about that, and especially some sort of unified pass. So that is a conversation that's going on. The second one is, do the survey responses, for you, Ruth, do the survey responses give us insight into whether voters would support a BART revenue measure in 2024? Did we ask any questions about that, Ruth?
We did not ask about a BART revenue measure for 2024. So yeah, I wouldn't want to make a guess.
Did we ask any other revenue measure questions, Ruth? This is a leading question, which I think
it is a leading question. So yeah, yes, John did. We did ask a question about a regional sales tax that has been for transportation. It's something that's been talked about. I'm just going to find that number so that I don't say the wrong thing. We did ask about a regional sales tax, like a 0.5-cent sales tax that would fund a number of transit and transportation improvements around the Bay Area with a 0.5-cent sales tax, and support for that was at 57% yes, 43% no, and that's lower than we've seen in polling before the pandemic.
Okay, thanks. So Cliff Waldeck asks about, I think I have this question right. Basically, if you're a homeowner, especially if you're a recent homeowner, his question is saying, but are they more optimistic than renters or what they're facing? The people that are investing a significant amount here, are they a more hopeful slice of Bay Area voters?
No, not necessarily. We tend to see actually a lot of the longtime homeowners tend to be more pessimistic. They tend to sometimes be more angry about change, more frustrated about change. And so a lot of times we see what we see in this poll is typical of other times, that the longtime homeowners tend to be actually some of the more pessimistic folks.
So thanks. So Allison Brooks asks, there was no mention of climate change as a concern, wildfires, drought, water, et cetera, in the poll. She's asking as a question, which did it come up as a top of mind issue with voters?
So it was not mentioned as one of the top concerns. So but it was mentioned by, sorry, I will find it. It was mentioned by some, and in previous iterations of this poll, we've covered the topic in more detail. We did not this time. So sorry, I'm just pulling this up. Environment or climate change was mentioned by 2% as the most important problem facing the area. Drought and water only came up in 1% mentioning that. Okay, so it's not, even though we're in a major water crisis, it was not mentioned by many. And as I said, we covered climate change in previous iterations. We didn't spend the time on it this time.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Rich Kinney wrote that there are many empty county-owned buildings and school district properties that legislation could force them to convert to housing or to sell. The only thing I can say about that is that at least the governor and the state level is trying to put surplus property out for housing, and they have an initiative on that. But I've just also read that it is, to state the obvious, not going as well as they hoped. And so we need to put more pressure on the state and others to do that. Rich, you're right about that. Kim Pritchard wrote on gray space conversion, which I believe is a reference to malls that are moribund shopping malls. Are we working on a clever effort to participate in that project and try and get those converted? And so we are, the Bay Area Council is doing some work on that. I forget, there are a couple of developers that are particularly focused on that. We can find some information on that and share that with you, Kim, and others about that. James Paxton writes, on many of the topics, the replies seem to be conflicted. There's dissatisfaction being expressed, but also, not much support for some of the solutions proposed. I think that this is particularly true when it comes to local control and how to pay for solutions. Are there any clues from the polling about how to build consensus on solutions so that these solutions can be advanced more quickly? Ruth, what do you see?
Oh, that's such an easy question. How do we build consensus? We've been doing a lot of polling. We are seeing, this poll is typical to what we've been seeing, a lot of contradiction, especially around the issue of housing. It is an ongoing challenge. I don't have the simple answer. I think the one thing that we've seen from a lot of our work is that we tend, when we talk about housing, we talk about policy, right? We talk about a percentage of affordable housing, or all of these different terminologies, ADUs and set-asides and all this. And what we miss in talking about are the people and the families who really, it's life-changing to have a place to live and to have an affordable place to live and be able to live in a community and walk in your community and have your kids go to school and go to work. And so, you know, some of it is about how we talk about these issues. Housing policy can be incredibly complicated for people that are not down in the weeds. And so it's how we frame this issue to talk about really the benefits and the outcomes and the people, and not about buildings and policy. But that's not an easy answer, and that will not magically solve everything.
It's hard to answer it, but it is a critical question. Claudia asked, is a half-cent sales tax for transportation the only type of revenue source that was polled? In this poll, yes. And I don't know, Ruth, if you have seen any other polling that you could talk about generally about support for public transit at this time, or even housing. If you don't have to specifically reference any polls, but is there a general mood of Bay Area residents in support of these sorts of things, or not, to get over a 2/3 margin? What are you seeing?
Right now, with gas prices at $6 a gallon, we are seeing a lot of hesitancy about taxes. That doesn't mean that taxes are, you know, support for taxes isn't down at like 30%. As we saw in this poll, it was above a majority, but reaching 2/3 right now is challenging for a lot of issues. That's not across the board for every issue, but we are seeing, like we've seen in other times where cost of living is a real concern, we see support for new taxes kind of goes down.
Okay. Susan Kirsch writes about, I think the general comment here is challenging the amount of housing that's being allocated to cities and counties. It's not much, it's just, I think it's more of a point of view that maybe we don't need the housing that the state is asking for from cities and counties. Let's see. So there's another one from an anonymous attendee that says, thank you for your report. There was no mention of poverty, which seems to be an underlying issue of homelessness and people having more and more of their income going to housing. Did you consider looking with a broader lens of poverty, inadequate wages, inflation, increased taxation and fees, et cetera? So I don't know, Ruth, if you have any insights on the impact of poverty, or how voters think about that.
Yeah, I mean, we really weren't in this poll, in this piece of research, really trying to get at sort of the underlying problems. Clearly, you know, poverty and other issues are, and mental health, there are underlying issues, obviously, you know, decades of housing policy that's created some problems. We really we're not able to get at that in this kind of research. This sort of poll, as you saw, we're covering a lot of topics and kind of getting very top of mind attitudes to mostly be looking at how is attitude changing over time.
Okay. There are a number of questions in here about housing. It appears that our viewers have the same point of view as voters do. And so one of them was about, do we have partnerships at the Bay Area Council with organizations to work on housing? And the answer is, of course. We work with lots of different, we are always forming coalitions on any bill that we're trying to support, or ballot measure, or advocacy that we would present to a city council, et cetera. So yes, we do. And the coalitions change depending on the issue. And then there was another question about mobilizing our leadership and the business community writ large, employees, to support housing production. And so actually we are thinking about being more actively engaged. We do have a number of staff from the Bay Area Council that show up virtually these days, but often in person in the past, to advocate for individual housing projects, especially ones that we endorse. But we're thinking about a broader partnership that could really expand out to prevent more support for more housing going forward. let's see, how involved is BCDC on using baylands or landfill for new housing? Fran, there was another question I think up above, and sorry, I don't know how to answer. I'm not sure how BCDC's, what their point of view is on housing, if they've been particularly supportive or indifferent, neutral, or opposing. I don't know. I'll try and find out about that to be able to answer back. I guess so, Ruth, I have a question for you too. You know, in this poll, you've been doing this with us since 2014. You know, what is the headline? What was the most surprising thing to you that came out of it? And you know, and what would be your big headline from it?
Well, I don't know that it was surprising because we live here and we're experiencing the Bay Area every day like everyone else. But so it wasn't surprising, but overall mood and I think the lack of optimism. So not feeling like things are getting better. You know, that people don't feel like the economy is going to get better in the future, that housing you know, is continuing to be a frustration. So I think, again, it wasn't a huge surprise given all that's going on in the world and all that's going on in the Bay Area, but I think it's a real frustration. And I think continuing to see that some of those numbers on, like you talked about, all the things that are being done on housing policy, that we're not seeing the needle shift on overall attitudes about willingness to support more housing being built. So it's just you know, it's a frustrating time, I think, for a lot of people, and we see that reflected in the numbers.
Yeah, I guess on the just a little bit more on the housing support for specific issues dropping, not hugely, but notably dropping for support in my neighborhood. Do you have any theories about that specifically? Do you think it's just general malaise?
I think, you know, I think it's a lot of things in what we've seen. I think that first of all, many people live in parts of the Bay Area where probably no new housing is going to be built, or at least not in a massive way, right? So maybe if you're in a single family, maybe even if it changes to a duplex or a triplex zoning, it's not going to change a massive way. So I think some people feel like, I don't want more housing because where they live, there probably isn't going to be more housing. And also that we see that a lot of people, and talking to them in qualitative research, and this is understandable, people have a hard time envisioning a built environment that doesn't exist. So we have people say, like, well, there isn't room. They don't know where it would go. We see this a lot about transportation as well as housing. And it's not like we're showing people that they can envision what it would look like. Also, that when we talk about housing, as I said, terminology is hard, that everyone has a different version of what more housing is. So for some people, when we say to them more housing, they immediately think of big, tall, you know, maybe 45, you know, like big, huge apartment buildings. And they think, well, that's not what I want. And we even saw in some research that we did, when we talked to people about duplexes and triplexes, they said, oh, I don't know, that doesn't fit in with my neighborhood. And we showed them pictures of what those look like, and they said, oh yeah, that's fine. So, you know, I think when we just use this terminology about more housing, not more housing, it's hard for people to really picture what we're talking about.
Great. Okay, I don't know if any more questions have come in right now. There's been a lot that have come through. And so I'll just wrap up with that we will send these poll results out to all the attendees, and you're free to use them and share them as long as you attribute the Bay Area Council and EMC research as you do it. And then the other part that I try and leave with is let's not let our region, we're at a fork in the road. A lot of regions face this kind of a situation, and some fix their problems and others go off into the sunset. There's plenty of examples of once great regions that, which I would consider us to still be, that have gone to Rust Belt, and we don't want to go there. And so I would ask you to please, continue to support the Bay Area Council, work with us. These are, hard things are hard, and working on housing policy in particular is going to be really difficult, but please join up with us as we try and get these things through. And thank you very much for attending. And thank you, Ruth Bernstein. Also, you're an incredible resource, and I'm so proud that you, even though you're a national polling firm, that you live and work here in the Bay Area.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Hope this was helpful.
Great. Thanks, everybody.